let's jump right into things. And I'm going to start at a place where a number of you asked about, but in a sort of oblique way that I'm going to go into a different direction. The big story right now, I think, is the fact that there was an article that came out yesterday in The Guardian, which identified an order issued by the head of the National Guard on October 8th, which was, I don't know, about 3 weeks ago. That order from Major General Ronald Burkett called for the National Guard in all 50 states and in American territories to create their own quick reaction forces to deal with riot control. For each state is supposed to have 500 National Guard troops for a total of 23,500. Now, if you remember back in the summer, back in August, Trump issued or signed an executive order in which he called for the National Guard to develop two different groups of 300 military personnel each to be stationed in Alabama and Arizona to be quick reaction forces to uh, east of the Mississippi and west of the Mississippi. And there was a bit of an outcry about that at the time, because here's the thing. We have law enforcement in this country, and we have no sign that there has been anything that law enforcement can't handle in its ordinary course of affairs. So at the time, people were like, hey, wait a minute, why do we need these things? But it kind of fell back into the wayside, back along the way with everything else that was going on. Well, now they're talking about uh, reactionary forces to ensure law and order against rioting of 23,500 people. And that sort of begs the question, why do we need that when we, again, don't seem to have any major issues that regular law enforcement hasn't been able to handle? And that is, I think, deeply concerning. It is perhaps goes in line with the other news that came out this week, beginning on Monday, with an article in the Washington Examiner, which revealed that now that Trump is overseas, or while he is overseas, that White House officials are replacing ICE field officers in at least 8 cities with leaders from Customs and Border Patrol, the CPB. And that really matters because and if you've listened to me, one of the things I always try and do is sort of keep in their lanes the different pieces of law enforcement or the military. They're not the same thing. The military cannot do law enforcement within the United States. But then we do, of course, have law enforcement as well. But often when we talk about what's happening in the cities today, people just say the military is in the cities. And indeed, Trump did send the Marines and Federalized National Guard into Los Angeles, for example. But for the most part, what you are seeing in places like Chicago is ICE and Customs and Border Patrol. And there's an important distinction between those two things, because for all that we identify the dangers of ICE and the violence that ICE has been engaged in fact, traditionally, ICE focuses on people who have committed crimes or who have final deportation orders in hand. And that's just what they do. That's what they are trained to do. And the Customs and Border Patrol, CBP, is in fact perceived as an act. The other ones in the green uniforms are much more aggressive. And in the things that have been going on since Trump took office, CPB has been the ones with the Black Hawk helicopters, for example, and who are just trying to get rid of all undocumented immigrants. And as such, they are really violent. Or can be really violent. So by taking the ICE leaders out and replacing them with CPB leaders, the understanding that has been reported at the Washington Examiner and the Fox News channel, and from there outward, what we are seeing is the attempt to make immigration enforcement much more aggressive than it has been to date, and to try and get deportation numbers up to where White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller has claimed that they're supposed to be, which is he wants to see, or says the White House wants to see, at least a minimum of 3,000 arrests a day. They are currently at 900 arrests a day. So we're talking about more than tripling the number of arrests a day. Well, if in fact that were to happen, you can see how there would be concerns about rioting in the United States. And that might have something to do with the fact that Homeland Secretary Kristi Noem, White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, off the top of my head, I forget the others, have moved onto military bases, which was reported today by The Atlantic. And that possibility that those people in the White House who are determined to attack undocumented immigrants in our country are planning to ramp that up really dramatically going into the winter and into the spring, might very well be behind a lot of what people are worrying about right now. But I also want to call attention to it because it seems to me that plays directly into the attempt of Trump and the MAGA Republicans to control elections going forward. That is, if indeed there does turn out to be real unrest at the injection of more aggressive immigration enforcement into our communities, into our cities, and into our communities, Trump is talking and has talked this week again about invoking the Insurrection Act, the idea that there is an insurrection against the government, at which point he claims he can do anything he wants and nobody can stop him. That's actually not totally true, but it's a very strong move. And if he did that, and we had military personnel in our cities and countryside, at the time of elections, we know that the presence of the military around elections is going to be a real problem for voter turnout and will seriously dampen enthusiasm for the opponents of the Trump administration to get out and vote because they'll be concerned about their safety. And those two things put together really worry me. And they also seem to me to be quite reminiscent of the sorts of things that Trump ally Steve Bannon is saying about the 2028 election, which he insists is going to mean Trump stays in office, and says that there are all kinds of ways that they can get around the 22nd Amendment. Now, I'm not going to leave you there. I'm going to talk about other ways that the American people still have a lot to say about that. But those are a lot of little pieces to put together that strike me as being a more plausible story than the idea that they are not related. It sure looks to me like Donald Trump is checked out. He is mentally not okay. If you've seen the footage of him wandering around Japan, and sort of not being able to answer a question and all sorts of questions about his health and so on. While that is the case, it certainly looks as if there is a group of people in the White House that is trying to cement power going forward and using the issue of immigration to do it. At the same time, there's another faction that is looking to cut the government dramatically because it is hoping to put in place a theocracy, and those would be led by Russell Vought at the Office of Management and Budget. So that's going on, and that is more than a little bit worrisome. Now, to get to your specific questions here, they all, to some degree, tie into this. First of all, most of the questions were about Trump's declaration that he wants to begin nuclear testing again. I think, unfortunately, we have to start from the baseline that the president is not okay. And this is a huge problem. And it's something you should be calling your representatives about and saying, do you think he's okay? Because that dude has the nuclear codes. And I think from what I can read, and again, it's not, there's the level of erratic behavior there is really hard. But from what I can tell, he is reacting to threats of Russian President Vladimir Putin to start nuclear testing over there. And the thing about nuclear testing is that Russia, China, and the United States have not engaged in nuclear testing since the 1990s, I don't think. And before that, the country that did the most nuclear testing was the United States. So to reintroduce nuclear testing now actually is not good for the US. We actually know a lot more about it than those other countries do. And it would take about 18 months to make that be viable. It is entirely likely, not likely, it is entirely possible that this was just Trump saying, well, if you're going to test your toys, I'm going to test my toys. And that's, of course, not the way a president is supposed to react. But I don't think that those people who are interpreting this as his move toward nuclear war are necessarily right on that, although he doesn't seem to have a very clear idea about nuclear weapons. So I shouldn't speak, I mean, I can't speak definitively on that, but it appears that's what he was talking about there. All right. Um, what other questions? People asked about whether or not there was a deal with China to buy soybeans. That is very unclear. Certainly, it looks like everything that happened on the Asia trip with China benefited China and not the United States. And apparently, Xi Jinping said his country would buy soybeans, but there were no real agreements. And in the past, when Trump has made an agreement like that with Xi, that in fact it doesn't happen. So I can't answer that one definitively either. People asked whether or not no, I'll do that one next. People also asked about what's going on with the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program fund. There is a reserve fund in the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which is what oversees the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program known as SNAP. There is a reserve that has about $6 billion in it. There's another pot of money that has about $23 million. I'm sorry, billion. Both of those should be billions. $6 billion and $23 billion. To fund SNAP in November costs about $8 billion. The understanding of Congress, apparently, when it wrote the law of, I think it was 2008, that established what would happen in the case of an occasion in which you needed to tap into a surplus in order to fund SNAP, indicated that they wanted that to happen. They put in place this reserve, and they said that the reserve would make sure that SNAP payments continued to come because people need them. Not only do people need the SNAP benefits, about 42 million Americans need SNAP benefits, but also the economy does. About 8% of food purchases are done through SNAP. And while the big purveyors like Walmart get the majority of that money, I hate these numbers because it seems counterintuitive. They get most of the money, but there are lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of small proprietors who also take EBT cards, electronic benefit transfer cards, that depend on that money to stay afloat. So, and then that money comes back into local economies. For every dollar that goes into SNAP, about $1.80 comes out of it. So cutting those SNAP benefits right now will not only hurt people, it'll hurt the whole economy, especially in local areas, especially in rural areas, which ironically are primarily Republican dominated. So the idea was to keep that money flowing, to keep that money coming in no matter what happened. And in September, when it was outlining a plan for what would happen if there were a shutdown, the U.S. Department of Agriculture said, "Yeah, we got this reserve that will kick in if we need that money." And then they also used earlier this month, they used the $28 billion reserve to fund women, infant, and children, the WIC program. A few weeks ago, or a week or so ago, I'm sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head what day it was, the Department of Agriculture changed its mind and said, oh, no, we can't tap into that money any longer. which was a pretty transparently an attempt to try and force the Democrats to say that they would sign away their demands to extend the benefit tax credits, which are what underpin a great deal of the Affordable Care Act healthcare marketplace. And the Republicans are trying to force them to back off on that demand, which will send health and is sending healthcare premiums through the roof. And the Republicans don't like the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. They've never liked it, and this is a good way to try and destroy it, but Americans really like it. So what they're really trying to do here is to get the Democrats to sign on to that, which was a measure that they created when they passed the what they call the One Big Beautiful Bill Act in July. They did not extend those tax credits. And they also made dramatic cuts to SNAP as well, and cuts to Medicaid as well. So the Republicans are trying simply to force the Democrats to sign on. And now they're saying, well, we're just going to make sure people go hungry until you sign on, which is a really interesting negotiation tactic to sort of say, well, we're going to force you to throw people off healthcare by starving people. And they're also making the calculation that Democrats care more about feeding people than Republicans do, which is probably true, but it's not something I would go in front of voters with myself. Anyway, that pot of money sits there, and somebody said, why can't they tap it? In fact, 25 attorneys general and or governors from Democratic dominated states, or in the case of two governors, states where there's a Democratic governor in a Republican dominated states, that's Kentucky and Kansas, have signed on to a lawsuit saying Congress is really clear here. Here's the language, here's the money. You got to let this money go. In that case, they went forward with that case on Tuesday. So why aren't they doing it? That's the best I got, because those benefits are supposed to go out on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and right now the government is saying it's not going to happen. Donald Trump has gone overseas, which is really unusual when there is a shutdown, and the House of Representatives is only in pro forma session. That is, it is technically in session, but they gavel in and gavel out every 3 days because there's a constitutional requirement to do that. But they're not doing any work at all, mind you, which is mind blowing when you still remember that this continuing resolution to fund the government through the 21st of November does not appropriate the money necessary for the fiscal year. They still have not passed any of those appropriations bills, and there are 12 of them. So that's where that stands in that. All right, so a couple more questions. You keep asking me, what happened to the valuables in the East Wing? I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't know. There have been reports saying things were destroyed, other reports saying they survived. I've not seen anything official about it at all. If I had to guess, which I don't, but if I had to guess, I would guess somebody at least took the paintings and the piano and all those pieces out of it. But it was done very hastily, and who knows what happened. The White House Historical Society claims that it made a digital record of the things in the East Wing, but I don't know. I don't know. It was nobody ever thought that somebody would just freaking bulldoze the East Wing of the White House. So I don't know what happened to that. All right. So what other things here? You asked about the vote that senators took recently on extending Trump's tariffs, or on approving of Trump's tariffs to Brazil, and whether or not that matters. That a number of Republicans voted against it. So no, in terms of big practical things, no, because the House of Representatives under Republican Mike Johnson, a Republican of Louisiana, has said they're not going to take up any tariff issues at all. So it doesn't matter what the Senate does on that front. What does matter is that it does indicate that a number of senators, and mind you, they're the ones who are more often ready to work with Democrats than not, but are willing to say, "You've gone to Trump, you've gone too far." And so that was a little bit of an important crack, even though it was an easy vote because they knew it was not going to go anywhere. It was also a hard vote because they have not tended to take a stand against Trump in any way. And I can't tell you which way to jump on that one, but at least it was a little bit of a change on that front. Um, you asked about what about JD Vance's, somebody called it his segregation tour that he has been on recently. And I think this is really interesting. That is, another question that people asked is who is really calling the shots in the White House? And my take on it is that it ain't Donald Trump. That they are, basically he and his family are making whatever money they can, but that it's really Stephen Miller and Russell Vogt who are running things in the White House. And but that does sort of raise the issue of what does it mean when you have a president who is not okay and who has 3 years left in his term? And I think you have to watch JD Vance right now as somebody who is trying to consolidate power behind himself. And when I see what somebody called his segregation tour going on, it certainly looks to me as if he is trying to pick up that MAGA base that Trump has always commanded, because this has always been everyone's question, right? Trump could command that MAGA base, but but it wasn't clear that anybody else could. And, I don't know if anybody reads him, who's listening right now, but John Harwood has been writing for, I always pronounce wrong, Zeteo, however you pronounce it. It's spelled Zeteo. And he had a piece today about his moderation of 2016 Republican presidential debate with Trump when everybody else was still on the stage in those early days. And he talked about, it's really interesting because he talked about it from his perspective. And he really was trying to get the other people on stage to say the things to Trump that they were saying, backstage, that he's a clown, that he doesn't know what he's doing and all this. And Harwood said that he was quite surprised when they all jumped in to defend him. That is, all the other candidates jumped in to defend Trump and to attack Harwood. And he interpreted that as their attempt to pick up his base. But what we have learned since then is that nobody has been able to command Trump's base, that there really isn't the kind of support for other candidates that people give to Trump. So one of the things that you can see, I think, JD Vance trying to do is to try and say, I'm the next incarnation of Trump. I'm going to do what you want. I'm going to pick up you voters. And you can see that in the fact he's appearing on Charlie Kirk's old show, and he's, trying really to court that base. And yet we'll see if that's possible, if he manages to pull that off. I mean, Trump, you love him or hate him, Trump was always really good at playing to a crowd. And JD Vance is had only had a year and a half experience in elected office at all when he became Trump's vice president. And he has never shown any great political acumen, I don't think. He was supported with huge injections of cash from Peter Thiel when he ran for the Senate out of Ohio, and was only in office for a year and a half before he got tapped to be vice president. So it's not clear to me that he is going to be able to do that, but to pick up that base. But I want to make a suggestion based on that again, that you didn't ask for, that I've been thinking about a lot today, and we'll probably write about it soon. One of the things, and thinking about it, because I did a thing with John Harwood today, and he really wanted to talk about the parallels between now and the 1920s. So, I got thinking a lot about the 1920s and about the rise of the new Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s. The old Ku Klux Klan really forms right after the Civil War, and sort of is broken by 1871 when the federal government creates the Department of Justice and goes into the South and basically arrests 1,000 or more Klansmen and tries them and sends them to jail. And Actually, it's an interesting issue for American historians because in that period, they basically destroyed all their records. It's very hard to rebuild what the Klan looked like simply because we don't have a lot of papers from them because they burned them all. It's another long history behind that I won't bore you with, although it's interesting to historians. But it rises again in the 1920s. And what's interesting, what I got thinking about today is that, and I'm just musing on this, but you got the rise of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s out of Indiana primarily, which comes from this thing that happens in 1877, 1878, after the Democrats take back over the South. A number of Black Americans leave the South and they go west. That's where we get the Exodusters and we get Nicodemus, Kansas, and we get a lot of the Black communities in the West. But a pocket of them go to Indiana. And this becomes a scandal in Indiana where the Democrats in that state claim that the Republicans have moved Black Americans into Indiana to turn it into a Republican state. Remember, the parties are switched in that era. So there's this big investigation of that, and there's this lasting sense in Indiana that Black Americans in Indiana are there to basically swing the state politically, which again you can see echoes of in America all over the place now. But so you get the rise of the Klan in Indiana in the 1920s, but it's interesting when it rises because it rises among rural Americans primarily, who certainly object to Black Americans, but they really object to immigrants. And the idea is that the system that is not good for rural Americans in the 1920s is bad because of immigrants. I mean, this is what they're really pushing in the Klan. I mean, they're pushing a lot of stuff in the Klan, but this is that idea, is that those people are hurting you economically. And the reason I got thinking about that today is because, the Klan went gangbusters for about 4 years. And then the guy who was in charge of it in Indiana was a guy named DC Stevenson, and a real power monger. He was he was a Republican. He'd been a Democrat. He switches sides, becomes a Republican. But the KKK, I mean, people are rising to power here in Maine over with the KKK. And that itself is a really interesting story. But what's interesting to me about all that is that um, the KKK explodes. I mean, it's starting to wiggle by 24 for a number of reasons that vary by state to some degree. But it really explodes in 24 when DC Stevenson rapes and murders Madge Oberholzer. Total sex scandal, power scandal, murder scandal, the whole thing. And what's interesting about that is that all of a sudden the Klan membership plummets. And yet that base is going to be the same base that by the end of the 20s and the crash of the 29, almost exactly now is the 29th of October and today's the 30th, is going to become the base that falls in love with and supports the New Deal. That is, they're still anti-immigrant, they're still racist or whatever, but they channel that political energy into rebuilding a fair economy. And in this moment, I think that's really interesting. Because one of the things that keeps bubbling up and falling down and bubbling up and falling down is these, I'm sorry, expletive Epstein files. And they're back in the news today because, and I promise you I'm not going to get this right because I am not a royal watcher at all. And I don't even know what the different titles are. But the royal whatevers in England are stripping everything from Prince Andrew, who is, I don't even know how he's related, but he's big in the family thing. Brother to King Charles, maybe? Anyway, what that says to me is that whatever is in those Epstein files is absolutely nuclear toxic. And a lot of MAGA was behind this idea of exposing the Epstein files and exposing those elite Americans who were not only assaulting children, but also were getting special treatment from the law. Um, and I don't know, that parallel just seems kind of on the nose to the 1920s and DC Stevenson, doesn't it? So um, that tie to Vance, MAGA, white supremacy, I don't know. Maybe I threw too much stuff out there to follow it closely, but I think that's what Vance is doing. But I'm also wondering if one, he can pick that base up, but two, just how firmly that base is going to stay where it is as more and more Epstein stuff comes out. I mean, I don't know. Like I say, I don't know. I can't imagine it's common to strip everything away from quite a senior royal on the basis of something like this. So I'm guessing it's bad. Um, all right, where else did I want to go with this? What we can do. So lots of people always asking about a general strike, and I keep saying this and saying this and saying this. In the US, because we are such a big country, general strikes often alienate the people that you want to have support you. Targeted boycotts are very powerful, and you're in very much less danger of goring somebody's ox because what works in one part of the country does not work in another part of the country. This is a really big country. And you know, if you've lived in a number of places in it, you recognize that what is a living wage in, you know, Muskogee, Oklahoma, is not a living wage in New York City. And yeah, there's a lot of things that are, you know, we have many commonalities, but we have a lot of differences as well, which makes it really hard for the whole country to engage in economic activity at the same time. Targeted boycotts, on the other hand, or targeted strikes are way more effective. So that's where I stand on that. Your mileage may vary, but if you're looking for a target, it's probably, you know, those, you know, are going to work. But what else can you do? So um, the I keep saying this, that all of the efforts that everybody is making are important, but what you are trying to do for the next year is to impress upon people who are running for office, either to be reelected or to for the first time, what you care about. And some of the things that people care about a lot are the mental competence of the president, which I think must be on the table now. I mean, call your representatives and say, do you think he's okay? Um, do you think he should have the nuclear weapons? Are you concerned? Um, Corruption is another one really to hammer on, and to really make it clear that you care about things like the Epstein files, if that's what you care about, but just to make sure there is pressure on elected representatives as SNAP benefits run out, as rural hospitals run into trouble, and so on. Make certain that your concerns are heard and that you don't support the anti-democratic things that this administration, or at least members of this administration, are doing. Because again, the people that I outlined as being part of the attempt to put CBP instead of ICE in charge around the country, or that are moving off of onto military campuses, those were not elected officials. Those are appointees. I mean, they could be removed. They could be fired. They could resign. Some of them could be impeached. You know, that kind of pressure, and to recognize that people can be separated off, is going to be important going forward. But before we even get there, remember that if you are looking for a place to put your energy right now, there's a major election coming up in 5 days. November 4th, Tuesday, is 52 up to 53. I might be too low on that. Elections are happening around this country. We got an important election here in Maine to try and protect absentee voting. We have a gubernatorial election in New Jersey, gubernatorial election in Virginia, Proposition 50 in California, state Supreme Court judges in Pennsylvania. And those are just off the top of my head. Every single state and almost every town has something on the ballot. Now is the time to get your friends to turn out. There are a number of organizations working to help people turn out, including my friends at Red Wine and Blue. This is a really good place to put your energy for the next 5 days, getting people to turn out for this election. And also always to spread true information as opposed to the swill that is coming from AI slop, for example, calling attention to true information and making sure that people understand what you care about. That you talk about these issues, that you keep these issues on the table, because the tide is turning. The fact that that Trump's approval ratings continue to tick downward, and that the MAGA Republicans are very concerned about losing the upcoming elections, or they would not be talking about putting troops in the different cities. So again, the more you can speak up now ahead of time and say, hey, I'm not okay with this, the better the chances are that we will not have extremes to deal with over the next year. But now is 100% the time to be speaking up. And remember, if you need to take a break, that's fine. And remember that, singing and having art and reaching out to people and being part of a community is as important a way to push back, even as speaking up politically, because by building those communities, by building those support networks, by helping each other out, we push back on the idea that is at the heart of authoritarianism, which is that we should be afraid and isolated. You want to be with your friends and not afraid to do your civic duty, to vote, to speak up, to use your right to speak up without fear of suppression, and to make combinations that will affect your communities. So I'm afraid I've been. I hope that this all made sense. It's been a long day, so I'm a little bit tired, and I did kind of do a rabbit hole on the KKK, but I think that's actually quite an interesting parallel, and like I say, I'm going to explore that more. All right. Please turn out to vote. Please get your friends to turn out to vote. Please keep speaking up, and please keep the faith. You can feel things are ramping up. You can feel not just the bad stuff, the good stuff. People are thinking, people are coming up with new ideas. They're thinking of new ways to create a new nation. And that's what we want to do going forward. We want to keep that momentum going, keep that pressure going to create a new country out of the chaos of the last, well, almost, at this point, 9 years. Anyway, thank you for being here, and I will see you again soon.